We mentioned a tradition that someone offered him his house for lodging, and that was somewhere down in the harbour. And John wasn't imprisoned in the cave. The whole island was the land of his exile. He was free to walk around Patmos, but he used to come up to the cave with his pupil Prochoros to pray. And it was on a Sunday when John heard behind him a thunderous voice, as of a trumpet, the voice of God. So strong that we believe the rock cracked into three, symbolizing the Holy Trinity. And the voice said, "Fear not, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. What you see, write in a book and send to the 7 churches." And John turned around to see where the voice was coming from. He saw 7 golden lampstands, in the midst one like unto the Son of Man, Christ, dressed with a garment down to his ankles. His hair was as white as wool, as white as snow, his eyes like flames of fire. His voice was like the sound of many waters, and from his mouth a double-edged sword came out, symbolizing the word of the Lord. In his left hand 2 keys, the keys of the underworld and death, 7 stars in the other. Around him 7 angels. The 7 lampstands at Christ's feet represent 7 churches: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamon, Sardis, Laodicea, Thyatira, and Philadelphia. To these 7 Christian communities, the book of Revelation was sent. You must have noticed in the beginning it is written as 7 letters towards these churches, a bit of a report card of how they were doing so far. The book of Revelation eventually became the last book of the New Testament. It consists of 22 chapters, and it was written in Greek, which was the whole New Testament, because that was the language most people understood at that time. It was the language of commerce. The easiest way for John to spread Christ's message was as if he had written it in English or Spanish today. It's the only prophetic book that we have from the New Testament, and it's difficult to understand because it was written in such a symbolic way. However, writing theological texts in symbols was common at that time. It was written in a way the Christians who were about to read it would understand it. They'd understand the nearly 200 allusions, references it was making to the Old Testament. But if, say, a Roman officer managed to get a copy, he wouldn't understand. As it talks about the end of the world, the second coming of Christ, the fight between good and evil, and the final victory of good. So even though it does talk a lot about destruction, with very vivid images, the stars will fall like ripe figs from the sky. Well, even though it talks about destruction, it was a book of hope. It was meant to encourage the churches and all the Christians of that time in a difficult time of persecution. And it was a message that was meant to stand throughout the centuries. Don't be afraid, everything will be all right in the end. Now John, as he said, only stayed here for about 18 months. He was free to return to Ephesus, and that's what he did. So from the time that he left, the cave was used as a place of prayer. It's from this oral tradition that we know that's the cave where he wrote the book. Much later it was formed into an Orthodox church. So when we go down those 40 steps, we'll have to use our imagination a little bit to see it the way John would have seen it. Because the cave is formed into church, so when John was there was no icon screen, no iconostasis, no oil lamps hanging from the ceiling. And very importantly, it was an open cave. John had a view towards the sea. On a clear day, he would have seen the coast of Asia Minor, where he had been exiled from. And the sea is mentioned several times in the book of Revelation. The new heaven, the new earth, there will be no sea. For John, that probably meant there would be no separation from his loved ones. We did mention about Christodoulos. He came here in the 11th century. He knew this was the important religious site. This is where he wanted to build